Hey, yo, welcome. What is happening, people? I kind of want to put this headphone on, but not all the way because my hair is looking good and I don't want to mess it up. Because that's what I want to do. That's what I want to say. It doesn't matter. How's everyone doing out there? Went ahead, put it on all the way. It's just one of those days where I need to not hear myself talk for whatever reason. I just don't really want to hear myself talk right now. I just kind of want to come up here, sit down with you people, and do a podcast. I hope everyone's doing well out there on this fine Sunday. I'm recording this on a Sunday. It's Tuesday for the world out there. Tuesday's like the dumbest day of the week, right? Tuesdays are stupid. Nothing gets done on Tuesdays. Mondays are awesome. Mondays are my favorite day. Wednesdays are... I never had a good experience this Wednesday because Wednesday's hump day. And that Camel commercial came out and completely ruined Michaels across the whole world. Right? I think the Camel's name was Michael. Or Michael. What day is it, Michael? Now, what was it? It was something like that. It was a hump day Camel commercial. And it included Michael. And it ruined that day of the week for me. I hope everyone's doing well out there. I was Taylor and I were watching a show called 90 Day Fiance, which I'm sure I've spoken about before on this podcast. In 90 Day Fiance, essentially the idea of the show is they take Americans, and these Americans inevitably end up doing online dating. And in the process of doing online dating, they fall in love or they find someone physically attractive. And the person is usually 9 times out of 10 a foreigner, if not 100% of the time. I think it's 100% of the time because the idea is the whole premise is an American dating a foreigner. And usually, almost 100% of the time, it's somebody who either lives in like the Philippines or they live in what's another place they usually live in? One second here. They usually live in the Philippines or they live like in Brazil. And we were watching it this one time and we started talking about whether it would be easier to assimilate into the US or if it would be easier to go to a different country. And it got me to thinking because it seems so obvious at first, like the reason why I think it would be easy to come to America is if you get here, there's nothing really stopping you per se to get a job and to work more to afford more money. The quality of job probably won't be nearly as what you want. But you can still get multiple jobs, 2, 3 jobs, and work long enough to eventually be able to afford whatever it is that you want. And if you come here from a different country, let's say you come here from Nigeria, or if you come here from Mexico, if you come here from Brazil or Russia, there's like a subculture here in this country where you could fly here, and if you fly into New York City, or if you fly into Los Angeles, if you fly into even like Baltimore, Chicago, you can find the people you can find the natives of your country that you came from, But if I'm an American and let's say I want to move to, I don't know, Rio de Janeiro, if I want to move to like Beijing, China, or a city in Japan or a city in Russia, as an American, if I fly there, the odds of there being a huge subculture for me, so I can interact with people with the culture that I know of, at least for the time being, is probably pretty low. And unlike other countries, in this country you can work and make money as long as you can get a job, as long as you can apply for a job. There's no like rules like in Sweden or Switzerland. If you make too much money, since it's a socialist run system, they tax you a certain amount of money where you don't actually make $1 million. They tax the hell out of you. Or in like China, since it's communist, they just won't let you make a certain amount of money. And then like Mexico and countries in Latin America and Central America, South America, the countries are corrupt. So you can't, the level of excellence isn't 100%. But in this country, there is always that opportunity everywhere you turn. And especially times like this where there's so much negativity around being American, being a American citizen. There's almost like this mutual head down, looking down at the ground that is among citizens right now. And it's concerning because it doesn't matter what's going on, cancel culture. It doesn't matter if things are completely blown 100% out of proportion. It doesn't matter how just absurd things do become. The opportunity people have in this country, if you can get here, or if you're born here, if you're blessed enough to be born here, are outrageous. You can literally do whatever you want and accomplish whatever you want. And that's not to say that we don't have our own share of issues. Like we don't have a set of issues, because clearly we do. We have plenty of our own social disagreements and flaws, culture flaws, society flaws. But as I was watching this show, you just kind of, as absurd it is, as crazy as the show is, it's called 90 Day Fiance on TLC. It's still really fascinating to see that these people are willing to leave everything behind to come to this country. I don't know. We did a lot of watching of shows this past weekend. One thing that I did kind of want to go over real quick was, so I've always been aware of what ADD is, autism syndrome disorder, ASD. I never really got into it too much. I never really done research in it. My girlfriend has done research in it. I have friends that are on the spectrum. I've worked with people who are on the spectrum, not personally, but I worked around people. And it's a disorder that I've read a book on it a while back called, I think it's Neurotribes. I think Taylor has this somewhere. I think she started it. Here it is. Neurotribes by Steve Silberman. And, ADD or ASD is something where it's a social disorder. It's a sensory disorder. It's a lot of different things. We don't really know exactly what it is, how it's developed, but we do know it's a spectrum. And we do know it doesn't look like anything. And we do know not any two people diagnosed with ASD have similar features, have symptoms that they 100% share, that they're 100% compatible with. It's just like a regular neurotypical person. No neurotypical person has the same personality traits. And with ASD, it's the same way. But for so long, people with ASD have been treated like second-class citizens, up to the point where they have been harmed, up to the point where they have been killed for the lack of knowledge of what they have, what their disorder is, and therefore not knowing what it is, it's been treated with death. It's been treated very unfairly. And as I got older, I wanted to do more and more just eye-opening readings with it. I worked with a guy who he had a family member who suffered from not suffered, but was diagnosed with autism. It's really fascinating if you look at autism in females versus males. Males typically diagnosed much younger than females do, just because of the way that males and females both present their personality traits. They're in a much different way. Where boys, you expect boys to be much more aggressive or outgoing, or what's the word I'm looking for? Exploratory. Much more have a higher capability of interjecting their opinions. You expect all those characteristics from a much earlier age from boys. So with that being said, if a boy is not presenting those features, those personality traits, or those stages of growth that you would expect, you can raise your eyebrow and be like, what's going on here? Now with females, it's the other way around. You don't expect the same exploratory, extremely outgoing, aggressive personality traits from a kid between, a girl from 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You just don't expect that. So it's much easier for people to side on, oh, this is just a quiet girl. This is just a girl who doesn't talk that much. And so since that is something that does happen, females tend to not get diagnosed late. Their diagnosis is much later in life. So that right there causes a lot of conflict of growth. Or having to constantly question why you are the way you are, and then one day you get a diagnosis, this is what you have, and then it explains everything about your life, why certain relationships failed, why you have failed yourself, why you don't have that many friends, why you have very unique obsessions or addictions to certain things, Legos, dinosaurs, whatever it is. And it could be very traumatic, and it can be even more traumatic for the people around them, because once you're aware of it, usually the standard thing that people do is when you're aware of something, you make a change. If you're in a relationship and you do something that your partner doesn't like, well, once you're aware of it, you do the best you can to adjust that personality trait of yours so you can better the relationship, so the relationship can continue and you can patch up where the water's leaking from, right? But when you're diagnosed with ASD, you physically cannot do anything about it. It's just knowing that you're different. And from there, you just kind of work with it. You try to elevate in a lot of aspects, but sometimes you just cannot do certain things ever that neurotypical people can't do, like myself and others. So I've been, in the past year or so, I've read a book on it. I've talked to people about it. I do, quote unquote research, but not really. I just kind of read articles and read studies and whatnot, but nothing really too serious, not like for school or anything, just for, my personal pleasure, which sounds pretty bad, but I hope you guys understand what I mean. Anyway, so we wake up one morning, my dad's talking about, he's like joking around about if you're having the Bachelor blues from the TV show The Bachelor, here's some other TV shows you can watch. And he says something about this show that follows autistic people. Well, at first, the way I interpreted it was the way he explained it to me. I'll just explain what I interpreted he said but I'm not going to explain what he said because I don't really know. I just know the way I heard it. The way I heard it was that neurotypical people were speed dating with autistic people, which sounds a little harsh. Like, I don't know why I interpreted it that way, but it sounds pretty ethically wrong or ethically questionable. And throughout the day, I'm like, I don't really think anything of it. And then I decided I just randomly put it on. And I'm sitting there with Becky and Taylor, and we're watching the show. And it follows characters, and it's called Love on a Spectrum, or Love on the Spectrum. And it takes these characters who, between 24 to 30 years old, and they're all diagnosed individuals with ASD, Autism Spectrum Disorder. And the show's based out of Australia. And you get a little bit of background on these individuals. I think there's like Michael, Kelvin, Maria, Andrew, and there's a few other ones. And you get background on the people. They talk about the family. They do this thing where they say 2 things that they like, 2 things that they dislike. And then the producer's like, why, or what is love to you? And they ask this to all these individuals, both females and males. And these adults give the most honest answers in the world. Like answers that only super honest people can say, or people on the spectrum can say. And it's a really good show because, like I was saying, how so many people with ASD struggle and are sometimes completely incapable, or not incapable, they're capable, but it's just never going to happen for them to find romantic love. And when I first heard the show, I thought it was, I sounded extremely offensive because I think the way I heard it, but even if I heard it correctly, it still sounds like a show that is, skating on thin ice, because it could misrepresent people with autism, but it doesn't. It's a really good show. And I mean, this podcast isn't going to be the longest one, and I'm not going to talk about too much stuff because that's just what I want to do. But it's a really good show, and it's a really emotional show. It's a really emotional show because for me personally, when I'm watching it, you're watching these these are characters. They have personalities about them, and everything about them is so honest and truthful and caring and loving, and they want so badly to find love, but they don't have the tools to ever find it. So it makes you sad, but it also makes me blessed to be in a situation where I can watch this and be like, that's not me, in a weird, selfish way. But it's on Netflix. It's called Love on a Spectrum. It's an astonishing show. It really is. It's a show that I highly recommend for a lot of people, because I think so many people have this twisted idea of what people on the spectrum look like, what they sound like, because it's a spectrum. It's from here to here, from low functioning to high functioning. Actually, I don't think they even use low functioning anymore. But then, people with Asperger's are on the spectrum too. There's so many. That's why they call it the puzzle piece, because every piece is different, is their own person. It's like a snowflake. Every person on the spectrum is their own thing, their own set of characteristics, a set of personality traits, and their own fascinations, their own love for things, their own hatred for things. And just like you and I, except they struggle big time with social constructs and trying to read people in figures of language, figures of speech and stuff. But I think it's a great show for people to just watch and just listen to, and just to be taught by these individuals what it means to be a tender, loving person, and to make yourself more aware of what this disorder is, what autism spectrum disorder is. And I think it can help a lot of people, because there's a lot of misrepresentations of what people look like with autism. I think a lot of people think, sadly, that people on the spectrum look like people who have Down syndrome, even though they're two completely different disorders. It's really good. It's really fascinating. I highly recommend the TV show to everybody out there. One other thing I just want to get in real quick before I let you guys go. Like I said, this is not going to be a long podcast. It's going to be like a 30-minute podcast, maybe 35 minutes at max. It's weird. Whenever I lately, when I run, I have I feel like I could talk all day long. Like when I run. But when I don't run, I feel like I'm kind of just lethargic, and I feel kind of lethargic right now because of that. It's also Sunday, and working on Sunday is something I don't normally do. And I'm not, work, yes. But even for my job, when I say work, I mean, I like to be lazy on Sunday, So doing a podcast on Sunday is different. But I had to get back on track to upload Tuesday and Thursday, so I wanted to do it today. But there's another book I just recently finished a book. I think I've finished 2 books since the last time just one. I finished a book called Empire of the Summer Moon, which was a book that I originally heard from Joe Rogan's podcast, and it's by S.G. Gwynne, I believe. S.G. Gwynne, I think Gwynee, I believe. It's a shorter book. It's like a 320-page book. It's an easy read. But the reason why I wanted to, one of the reasons why I wanted to pick up this book and read this book is because, for 2 reasons. My family is Shawnee Indians, like generations, and I think like 4 generations of my grandfather's mother, I think, was 100% Shawnee Indian. So my great grandmother on my mom's side was 100% Shawnee Indian. My great grandfather was not. I believe he was 100% Irish. He came here, hooked up with his wife, just didn't know it at the time, and it created this side of the family, which led to me. So thank God that happened. So I wanted to just learn more about Native Americans. This book doesn't really talk about Shawnee Indians that much at all. It speaks about them a little bit here and there, but not like really any background information on them. So those reason number 1, I wanted to read this book because I felt like I've never been given a proper education on Native Americans at all, and I've always thought of them, unfortunately, and this sounds really bad, but like the feather people, like crisscross applesauce, playing the drums, smoking peyote, in that way, because that's the image you get when you're in school. The Pilgrims meet the Indians, and peace ensues. They throw in the Trail of Tears, and then there's reservations 200 years later, 300 years later. And I felt like I was, really lacking on my knowledge of Native Americans. So I was like, well, I've said it before here on the podcast, but I don't like the feeling of not knowing or feeling like I should know something, because I don't like, it makes me feel like ignorant. So that was reason number 1 why I picked up this book. And reason number 2 is because the Redskins just had to change their name. I think they're called the Washington team, the team from Washington. They had to change it from Redskins. And I understood why it was offensive. It makes sense why it's offensive, because it's derogatory and it's a name that the oppressors used in a way that was slang, So it's the same way the N-word is offensive to African Americans, because it was the word that the slave owners used to describe people, this group of people. That was its color. And it's the same thing why Redskins is offensive, because it's what the oppressors used. It's what the white people used as slang to communicate who these people were. So, yeah, of course, I understand that. But I wanted to know more about it. I wanted to know more about the history of Native Americans and get a much more raw, real not interpretation, but factual information on who they were. So I listened to this podcast and I found it kind of interesting at the time. Not really like super interesting, but I did have those two reasons on why I wanted to learn about them. So I'm going through Barnes & Noble and I'm looking for psychology books, some type of books about psychology, but also DNA, human evolution. Just kind of want to get back because I've kind of been reading. Well, I've read Chaos, and then I read 2 economic books, and then I read The Dragons of Eden, which is an evolutional book, which is a beautiful book. By Carl Sagan. I think I spoke upon that book. I'm not 100% sure. But I was going through Barnes & Noble, and they had the philosophy section, and they had Friedrich Nietzsche right there, and I wanted to pick up Nietzsche, and I was like, I'm not going to pick up Nietzsche. So I turned the corner, and I saw, behind me was the African Studies, and then to the left of that was Native Americans, and I was like in the crouch position like I was a catcher in baseball, and as I turned around, it was right at eye level with me. So I decided to pick up the book because I heard of it from Joe Rogan's podcast. So I didn't go in there looking for it. But long story short, I picked the book, I read it, and it could have been finished in 2 days, but I kind of broke it up over time. I finished this book within, I think, a week and a half, and it's based around the Comanche Indian tribe, which ruled from like the mid 1600s up until the dominant era, up until I guess the 1850s to 1650s. That's what I meant, up to like the 1850s, maybe even earlier than the 1650s. But they migrated south from like Colorado, and there were a Native American tribe that were savages, like, and I mean that in a non-offensive term, but like they were very nomadic, like in a time where the Western world was coming here to this country, to the United States, and building on the eastern side of the continent. The Mississippi was keeping them away from the wild, wild west, the plains, the Great Plains of Texas and Oklahoma and New Mexico and Arizona and South Dakota, Idaho, Nebraska, these places, Missouri. And these Comanches were broken down into different subgroups. And they were the Indian tribes that mastered the horse, the ability to ride a horse, from the Spaniards who immigrated into Mexico and came up through Texas. They fought. Comanches took their horses, mastered horses, so much so when they rode the horse, they could throw the right leg up on top of the horse, put the left leg underneath the horse, drop to the side, take both hands off the horse, and then shoot arrows. I think it was like 10 arrows like in 30 seconds or something like that. And they could do this at full gallops. And they traveled with buffalo. They traveled through the plains with buffalo. They used buffalo as for the teepees. They were a warrior group. They raided everything. They killed all the Indian tribes. They killed any white people that were near them. And they didn't just kill, they mutilated. They would take women, take children, scalp them, rape the women, gouge the eyes out. They would hang testicles and the labias from the capturees' women's vaginas on sticks, put heads on sticks. They would de-scalp them. They would run the horses so far that if the horses stopped and they couldn't go anymore, they would kill the horses and eat the horse meat. They were you know, nomadic people living in a modern, semi-modern time. And they didn't stop until like the 1880s, or like the 1870s. 1870, that's only 150 years ago. You know, great-great-grandparents were born during that time. Maybe great-great-great-grandparents, but still, it's not like, it's the things that they're doing seem like medieval time. But it wasn't, though. And it was such a fascinating read. The way that Texas dealt with everything, the Texas Rangers, because you get this idea of like Chuck Norris as Walker Texas Ranger growing up, but the Texas Rangers were savages. And every time you think of Civil War, for some reason, I never thought of Texas being involved. And they were not even, they weren't really involved at all. They were almost like forgotten about by the rest of the country. And after you read the book, it explains so much about why Texas is the way they are. There are aggressive characteristics about them, the way that they handle things, the way that they do business, the way that they just feel like they're not, like they can do whatever they want. And you feel for these Native Americans. But it's a really fascinating read. I think it's a great book for anybody who has Native American heritage at all. I guess I'm like 1/8 Native American, maybe like 1/16, maybe not that much. But I think it's a book that a lot of people can read. And I've started this new book called The Joy of Compounding, which one of my buddies at the gym went ahead and bought me. I'm super excited to read that book. But there's some things you can do during quarantine. Just a few books that I've read during quarantine, which I think you guys will enjoy, and I would go ahead and let you go. Chaos, The Dragons of Eden, Maps of Meaning. What else? There was a few other books. I forget what they were. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and oh man, I don't see it up here. Oh, I gave it to my buddy. Oh shit. I gotta look this up real quick. Let me look this up real quick, then I'll let you guys go. Goodreads. I use that to track all my reading. My books. It's not going to come up. I think it was like Patrick something. I talked about a little bit here. It's like the book that got me into the stocks, which, by the way, I've sold off all my stocks. The only things I own now are I sold them off, but I reinvested them. The only stocks I own now, I'm not going to remember it. It's not coming up on my phone. Is the QQQ, which is NASDAQ, which is like the top 100 tech companies, and Vanguard S&P, which is the top 500 companies. That's all I own now. I just decided, just long term, just keep on putting money into it, keep myself away from it. I'm not a pro. I don't know what I'm doing. But that's episode 108, guys. I'll catch you guys in episode 109. If you enjoyed it, please leave it some feedback, leave it a rating, subscribe on YouTube, like on YouTube. I'll catch you guys in episode 109. Thank you so much. Peace out. See you.